Oh, well, hello, hello. Thank you for joining us, everybody who is watching at home. This is Dark Horse here, and we are about to dive into Dark Horse manga this week. I'm Kara, and with me today is my coworker, Kate. Kate J, thank you for joining us. And we have a special guest, one of the translators who has worked on many different Dark Horse manga and art books, Zack Davisson.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, Zack, thank you for joining us.
Of course.
So while we're all staying home and quarantining, we're highlighting some of our favorite comics and universes. And of course, as I said, this week, we're focusing on manga. Dark Horse has actually been publishing manga for more than 30 years at this point, which is pretty crazy. One of the very first manga publishers in North America. And all of our manga is licensed from folks in Japan and then translated into English, which is where Zack comes along, as well as many other translators we are fortunate to work with, but Zack is definitely one of the frequent contributers. So,
and I should say, I got my start reading manga via Dark Horse.
Oh, what was your first?
Years. Hold on, just 1 second.
Ooh, we're gonna take a deep dive into the archives.
It would have been this comic right here, Outlanders.
Oh, nice.
Yes. So yeah, back when Dark Horse published manga that looked like this, in a very familiar format to comic book readers, but less so to manga readers. But yeah, this is one of the old Dark Horse comic manga right there. I love this comic so much that I have a tattoo of it. My first tattoo. And I'm constantly telling Dark Horse, like, hey, when are we going to bring back Outlanders? Come on.
It's a great question that we'll have to ask our editors at some point. Also, you're probably going to have to share a photo of that tattoo on your social media.
Oh, yeah.
For the viewers at home. Yeah, I'm not going to make you do that right now, though.
Yeah, I'm not going to disrobe right at the moment.
maybe a Dark Horse After Dark at some point. So I'm just going to run through a few quick housekeeping notes before we get down into it and chat with Zack some more. So everybody who is watching at home, you are welcome to start asking your own questions of Zack about Dark Horse manga and translation. Please drop those questions in the chat, and our moderators will be checking those out and kind of feeding those over so we work them in throughout the stream today. You are also invited to enter a giveaway. We have a grab bag of Dark Horse manga to give away. It's some of our recent books. The way to enter the giveaway is to enter in the chat once and only once, or you will be disqualified. Use the pound sign or number sign or hashtag symbol, whatever you would like to call it. Hashtag Berserk. The keyword is Berserk. BERSERK. Once and only once in the chat, and you will be entered to win. And the books you will win include what I'm holding up right now. This is Danganronpa, our latest Danganronpa manga, Goodbye Despair, Volume 1. Star Blazers, something familiar to Zack, especially. This is Volume 2, actually, because that is the most recent volume that has come out. Mob Psycho 100, Volume 4, also a new release, just out a couple weeks ago, pandemic or no pandemic. Gantz Omnibus Volume 5. This is a chonk. All of these are chonks. They collect several of the original volumes, more like this size, in one. And then we also have, this is not exactly manga as it is prose, but it is illustrated by Yoshitaka Amano, Vampire Hunter D, the latest volume. This is volume, gosh, what are we up to? 29, Noble Front. So you win a grab bag of all of those recent manga if you enter the keyword in the chat, and we will draw the winner near the end of the stream today. You, again, are welcome to start asking your questions now, and we'll keep an eye on that throughout the broadcast. Just remember to be excellent to each other and be polite, if you will. One final note before we move forward. All the books we discussed today are currently available through comic shops, bookstores, anywhere you would normally buy books, as well as digitally on Dark Horse Digital, Comixology, and more. We have a big digital sale right now. Everything is 50% off at Dark Horse Digital, and that is mirrored on sites like Comixology. So now is a great time to start something if you haven't, you've been curious about it, maybe try out a series and go for the rest if you like it. We also encourage you to shop locally. Start Blazers, start with Volume 1. We also encourage you to shop locally if you can. Many comic shops and bookstores are offering online ordering, pickup, or curbside pickup rather, or delivery. You can find shops near you if you go to comicshoplocator.com or indiebound.org to help find bookshops as well. And then I was going to ask Zach, actually, do you have any local shops that you would recommend to folks?
Definitely. If you're in the Seattle area, I give a shout out to my local comic shop, Phoenix Comics. It's very sad that we didn't do free comic book day there last week, like I have done for the past many years, but they are an amazing shop and they do curbside pickup, and absolutely visit Phoenix Comics. If you are in Oregon, I shout out to Books with Pictures, also amazing shops in both Eugene and Portland. So highly recommended.
And they are doing deliveries personally right now,
yes.
Which I find very impressive.
Amazing. I mean, Katie Pride is just an amazing force for comics that everyone should support.
Well, thank you for those local recommendations. And again, comicshoplocator.com. If you are not in the Pacific Northwest where we all are, that'll help you find some more shops near you. So without further ado, let's get into our fun questions for Zach. Kate is actually going to take it away, and we're going to dive into Dark Horse Manga with Zack Davisson.
All right, Kate.
All right.
Shoot.
So we've got a bunch of stuff that you have worked on, and we're going to start with something that you actually just wrote the introduction for. So you didn't do this translation, but it does seem like it is maybe near and dear to your heart a little bit. So we're going to start with the wonderful What's Michael?
Yeah, What's Michael? Beautiful, and just one of the most renowned comics, manga that have been ever put out in English. And the fact that Dark Horse finally did a re-release of it has just been amazing. People have just been craving What's Michael, and myself as well.
Yes, me as well. As soon as I saw it was coming, I was so excited to work with it and see it, and having the whole collection. It's the Fat Cat collection that we just recently released is so beautiful. So my first question for you is a tough one, and that is, what is Michael?
I love that. And I love the fact that I even write about this in my introduction, that in the entirety of the series, it never answers that question, right? What is Michael, right? Michael's a cat, but it's not necessarily a cat, or is it? I mean, because Michael is owned by many different people. It's this great stream of consciousness comic. And one of the things I love about What's Michael, so part of the history is that it was written by Makoto Kobayashi, who had no intention of making it, right? He had no intention whatsoever of making a cat-based comic. In fact, he was best known as like a shonen fight judokai, right? But he was doing this one comic, and just in the background, he scribbled this little cat, right? It was just like a side in one of the panels. And an editor, like, he turned in his page, he's like, here's my latest fight comic. And they're like, what's that? And he's like, I don't know. I just drew a cat in the background. He's like, that's your comic, buddy. And he's like, well, are you serious? He's like, yep, that is the cutest thing I've ever seen. Give me 8 pages on that character right there. And Kobayashi's like, you want it? Fine. So he made like this little sample comic that ended up with the cat getting shoved out the window because he didn't even want to do a cat comic. And he turned those in. The other's like, hilarious. That's your new series. And so his entire career was based on just this ridiculous comics, this little sketch of a cat that he did. And obviously it was far more popular than anything else he'd ever worked on. So he just kept doing like this stream of consciousness. Like every single episode, he didn't care. It's just like, what do I have to do? And he makes up a new story about Michael, but they're all brilliant. They're just, and everyone, like, sometimes he's clearly just like, I'm just sick of my life. And so Michael's sick of his life. And sometimes other stuff happens. And it's just this shooting from the id comic about cats. I mean, they go to a planet that's all cats. It makes no sense whatsoever. And I love it. I love it so much because of that. And I love the fact that Kobayashi never wanted to make this comic. And it just was like, I could just see him grumpy. He's like, I got to draw that damn cat again. But obviously he did a great job with it because he loved, loved the comic dearly. You can see in the comic, but it is so many different things. It's one of those comics that we just read on multiple layers, right? Because you can read the sort of like gags, and then you can sort of like read the subtext of all of that. And it's brilliant. So yeah, I mean, when Philip Simon, the editor, was like, he emailed me, and he's like, oh, we're thinking of bringing it back. I'm like, yes. And, talked myself into writing the introduction for it, which worked out pretty well. So yeah, but it's fantastic. It's such a good comic.
Philip might have thought that it was optional to bring it back, but I was pushing hard.
Yeah.
So
it really needed to come back. I mean, What's Michael's one of those perennial ones that should never be out of print. You know, people should, because even though it was from the 90s, and I also really like, you know, spot on to Dana Lewis and Torrin Smith, who did the translation, still as good now as it was ever. You know, I'm just reading through it. Like, I mean, I would have loved to have retranslated it, given the opportunity, but then they just did such a brilliant job. There's no need to.
Yeah, no, totally. It's been called the Garfield of manga, and I think that's a great sort of way to get people into it, but I don't think it quite captures the true essence of it.
Not at all. Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's Garfield in the fact that there is a striped orange cat, and that is the entirety of the similarities. From there's, you know, there's no similarity at all, but it's great. I like the Fat Cat volumes are great because there's 3 volumes in one, you know, so you get the entire series in 2 volumes. And it was so much fun. Like, I haven't read the series for years, and it was so much fun to dive back into it, just cracking myself up while reading it. And yeah, it's a blast.
It's been one of my quarantine reads, and it's been a light in a very stressful time. So yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Right.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, that's a really good call out.
Oh yeah. Do you have a favorite What's Michael moment?
Oh God. I mean, there's like, some of them are just, I have so many. Like, I love the vampire who's like, you know, like terrified of cats. I mean, it's just so bizarre. It's just so random. And I love the, like, from a translation perspective, I really love the big fat cat named Nyanzilla, because it's just such a really brilliant translation choice. Like, it's really well done. And then when she like turns up pregnant, and like all the other ones, like, oh, how could they're talking to their handsome cat, like, how could you have thrown your life away? I know, it's just freaking hilarious. And I love like a lot of the other stuff. Like, even every time I love when Michael shows up and he does like his Bakeneko dance, like, I love that, because even from a historical perspective, and that's one of the things I write about in the introduction, is that that's very linked to these old Edo period images. And there's a lot of, you know, once again, goes beyond that surface level reading that you're like, oh, there's this, but then you realize Kobayashi actually packed a lot in there, you know, that a lot of extra layers in there that he probably didn't have to, but he did, and it makes it just so much better.
Yeah, I totally agree on all of those fronts. So how did you end up writing the introduction for What's Michael?
Well, I wrote a book on supernatural cats called Kaibyo, the Supernatural Cats of Japan, because I also, along with translation, I'm a writer as well. And so I've been giving, you know, panels on Japanese cats and things like that for a while now. And I'm friends with the editor, Phil Simon, and, you know, we both like cats. So when it came time to do something about cats, I was like, yes, I am there. Yeah, he just contacted me and it worked out well. So, yeah. Yep.
I think Philip is one of the biggest cat fans that I know.
Yes.
Social media shows it, and it's fantastic to talk to him about cats.
Yes, and I got to
cats rule.
Yeah, I got to give my personal love letter to Philip and his love of cats in there in my introduction. So if you know Philip, you'll know what it is.
Yep.
Shout out also to Ethan Young, who I know was also pushing for the revival of What's Michael as I was doing. Ethan
nice.
Young is another creator we work with, and he is another cat fan. So cat fans united to bring you all these new editions.
Yeah.
So to turn a completely 180 from cats, we're going to talk about the Isle of Dogs now. So you just recently translated this guy. Can you kind of give us a little overview on what that's about? Because we know it's a movie, but
it's a manga book about an isle of dogs. So, I mean, is it a manga is an interesting question. I know that, you know, Kara said that earlier, like about Vampire D. She's like, it's not a manga. I mean, if you look at the word manga, it means something very different in Japanese than it means in English. Like English, we sort of adopted the term to mean specifically Japanese comics. It's not at all what it means in Japanese. In Japanese, it just means, like Vampire Hunter D, that novel would absolutely be manga in Japanese, you know, absolutely. Basically, it's anything from that sort of entertainment realm, all counts as manga. Even like, you know, like, I don't know, like, and I literally mean everything, you know, like the other day when we were watching, my wife and I were like going to turn on TV or something. I was like, oh, do you want to watch the latest Avengers movie? She's like, no, I'm so sick of manga. Because from a Japanese point of view, the Avengers movie is in fact manga. You know, it's all manga. So Isle of Dogs, absolutely manga. I think this is a fascinating series because it was written, as many people know, Wes Anderson made this movie that was set in Japan, and had no, it had like this sort of like very sort of loose connection with Japan. And then an actual Japanese person took the story, Mochizuki Minetaro, and wrote an actual comic, and did it in a way where made it very much their own thing, which I think is quite nice. Minazuki is best known for, I think, his comic Dragonhead, I think is really well known for. So he's done like these sort of post-apocalyptic comics before that are really great. And he just did like this brilliant little heartwarming version that doesn't necessarily follow the movie per se, which is another thing I like about that. Like, one of the things when you do manga adaptations, there's often the idea that you're not beholden to the source material, right? The adaptation should be something new. It can be something inspired by the source material, rather than if you do a sort of like, if you just translate this story from this medium to another medium, why bother? Why not just watch the movie instead of read the comic? So he did something new with it. It's really nice. It's really heartwarming. Yeah.
We do have a question from chat for you, actually. Do you have a favorite dog in Isle of Dogs?
Do I have a favorite dog in Isle of Dogs? Wow, that is like, honestly, my favorite dog. I mean, I like all of the dogs, but I really love the initial story, because I find it so heartbreaking. It's a dog I know very well. Is the initial story of Laika, the first dog in space. There's actually an entire comic written about Laika that it would just like, if you have a heart, it will reduce you to a bucket of tears, but it is so well done. And so reading Laika's little introduction here in Isle of Dogs was just like, oh, I remember your sad, sad tale of a dog who loved and in return was frozen to death in space. But yeah, I like that. And I think Isle of Dogs is also really topical because it's about a plague. Oh, well, we wouldn't know anything about that right now, would we? Oh, so
interestingly, we have a few comics that all came out around the time of.
Yeah. So both Isle of Dogs and What's Michael are perfect Corona reading, right? One will make you happy and one will make you somewhat think, and sweet. And then afterwards, after it's all over, you're going to like run up and pet your dog because you're like, oh, I don't deserve all the love you give me. I was never worthy of all you have to give. I always say like that's the, it's funny because I do have both dogs and cats. I know that people, like a lot of people, like I'm a cat person, I'm a dog person. I feel like you need a dog to make you feel better about yourself, and then you need a cat to make you feel worse about yourself. Like you need those two balancing elements at any time.
Well, and Kate is a good example of someone with a cat who can do some dog-like activities, actions, tricks, if you will.
Nice.
Yes, I've taught him both how to fetch and how to sit during quarantine. So we're really yeah.
It's a real sit too.
Yeah.
I worked with animals at an animal welfare organization for many years before I came to Dark Horse, and I am not lying when I say that Kate's cat does tricks better than I think I've ever seen another cat that isn't like trained by a pro. So
nice.
Good job to Elvis, Kate's cat.
Yes.
Well, Shere Khan does no tricks other than be very demanding.
I mean, that's a very important skill for cats to have, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you also for that shout out about like what manga really means. I actually have gotten some pushback when I have called Vampire Hunter D, for example, manga. And I mean, it is a broader term than I think a lot of people maybe understand.
Well, and I think especially like, I don't know, there's a huge difference when you're bilingual and you have to sort of like switch back and forth. Like I've got a little toggle in my head and I try not to be too uppity about it. But I do think of the word manga. I think people get so stuck on what is manga, that it almost inhibits them from experiencing and enjoying things that they might otherwise because they've declared themselves a manga reader. Like I don't even generally like using the word manga. I'll generally just say comics because to me it's all comics. Like this right here is a comic book, I mean, this is a comic. You can call it a manga if you want, if you feel the need to subcategorize it, but like I don't really feel the need to I don't know, to like limit myself, I guess, or to label myself that way. And like, I'll tell people all the time, like, what do you do? I'm like, oh, I translate comics. I work in comics. And I like comics, and comics is a perfectly usable word. And so is manga, but manga, it doesn't need to be that defined, you know?
Sure. We have one more question about Isle of Dogs from the chat, if I can work that in here.
Sure.
Do you expect a continuation of the Isle of Dogs?
I don't think so. I think it's fairly self-contained. I think the story in and of itself is perfect. You know, it finishes well. I think honestly, if there was a continuation, it wouldn't be very good. So there's nothing in it where I turn that last page and I'm like, you know, oh, I want to read the next page. I don't. I turn the next page. It's like, that was it. You know, the period was put on the sentence, and I need read no more. So
fair enough.
Yeah.
All right, so we're actually going to move on to a different adaptation that you worked on, and that is The Mountains of Madness.
Oh, yeah.
So this one is adaptation from Gutanabe, from the H.P. Lovecraft story, Mountains of Madness. Ooh, there they are.
I'm gonna slightly. This is another thing I hate doing. I'm gonna slightly jump in and correct the pronunciation. It's Gotanabe.
Thank you. I knew I got it wrong.
No, don't worry about it. It's a pet peeve of mine. I don't like it when they use the OU spelling. I think it should just simply be GO, the same way it is with Go Nagai, who has the exact same name as Gotanabe. But he likes it that way, so that's his choice. But it means we all say it goo.
We all say goo instead of go. Yep. Well, now I know, and I will say I had it in my notes, goo, go, but
I've heard Zack say it enough that I know that it's go.
That's
but
go, yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's an interesting. I think it's a visual cue. You know, it's that extra U or the U, and we just mentally.
And it's one of the big parts of translation theory, like right there in his name. And we could dive into this in a deep level that probably no one's really interested in. But there's the difference between technical accuracy versus readability, right? Like if you look at the way it's spelled in Japanese, GOU is technically accurate. That would be an accurate translation. But then by putting that in English, it then actually makes it harder for an English person to pronounce it more accurately, because OU for us makes a different sound. So that's why I personally prefer just cutting the O out, the U out. And it's weird what people do. Like, no one puts the U in Tokyo, even though it's the same way. It should technically be Tokyo, but it's not. So yeah, but it's go. But Gotanabe is he is just my favorite, and I love him dearly. And his version of Mountains of Madness and all of his Lovecraft stuff is just astounding, just absolutely astounding. I can talk about for hours. Go ahead, ask me a question.
You're good. So had you read the Lovecraft version prior to reading the Gutanabe rendition?
Oh yeah, I mean, I am a dyed-in-the-wool Lovecraft fan. I've been reading Lovecraft since, as I say, long before I should have been reading Lovecraft. I've probably been reading Lovecraft. I'm trying to think how old I was. I was probably around 8, I think, when my mother bought me blood-curdling stories. What was it, like blood-curdling stories to make you shiver or something like that? It was this Lovecraft collection with this really magnificent Michael Whelan cover, and I love the cover, and she bought me the book, and I've been reading them ever since then. Like, I know my Lovecraft chapter and verse. I'm a fan. And so like when that was another thing, like there's some stuff when you get assigned manga, there's just, like for me at any rate, most of the stuff, if I work on something, is something I'm super passionate about. Like I've done a couple that were just kind of jobs that I didn't know much about it, and it's just not as much fun for me. Like I think that a good editor knows how to match up someone who's going to be excited about a project with something, and for Lovecraft, there was just no question. I'm going to be there and do a great job. And it's proved to be one of the best things I've ever worked on, for multiple reasons, not only because I'm doing my love of Lovecraft, but to this day, Gotanabe remains the only manga artist I've ever worked on to hit me up on Twitter. So that's been pretty fun. Yeah. So Gotanabe and I are in each other's DMs having a good time. And that has made it a lot of fun, because normally that's just not something that happens. And it was totally him just reaching out. And he's pretty funny and a nice guy. Yeah. And actually, it was really funny because when we were at the Eisner Awards, because The Hound and Other Stories was nominated for an Eisner Award. And so I'm sitting there at the table with like Carl Horng and like, you know, Dave Gibbons and the Peonies, and we're all sitting there and it's all awesome. And then the name goes up to announce the Eisner Award, and, you know, we lose, which sucks. But like 2 seconds later, I get a text from Go saying like, oh man, that sucks. And I was like, dude, you're on, like, what time is it there for you? It must have been like in Japan, like 4 a.m, and he's sitting there watching the American news to see if he won the Eisner or not. It was hilarious. So.
I think I'm glad you called out his Twitter, because I was going to ask you, and I found it and I put it in the chat just now.
Oh, yeah.
If anybody wants to give him a follow.
Yeah, I do follow him. He's great, and he posts a lot of artwork on there, and he's just like, you know, like a lot of random stuff that you wouldn't necessarily expect Go to post. He posts on there. Yeah. His
art is just phenomenal. I love it.
Oh, his art is phenomenal.
It's so good.
One of the things I love, especially like about his stuff, like about Mountains of Madness, is it's really managed to break out of the sort of manga barrier. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of stuff like I'm a manga reader, and so I read, you know, Shonen Jump, you know, I read this kind of stuff, you know, but really Tanabe's stuff has reached that. So where you have people like James Tynion IV, who writes Batman, is probably one of the hugest fans that I know of Go Tanabe's manga. You know, he's constantly like, when is Dark Horse going to put out more Go Tanabe? Right now, you know, and I love it because he's sending this out to his, you know, 20,000 Twitter fans and everything raving about Go Tanabe. And I think that that's really opened a lot of doors to people to try it that maybe wouldn't normally have tried it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I also think it's interesting because like the thing about Tanabe's manga I love is I'm absolutely going to contradict myself about Isle of Dogs, right? Isle of Dogs was like the cool thing is that they took it and they made something new, right? But what Go Tanabe did with Mountains of Madness is he did a straight adaptation, which is something that is almost never done in comics. Like every time someone adapts Lovecraft, they feel the need to do their Lovecraft. You know, they're like, I need to take my, you know, it's like, I was convinced a lot like Shakespeare. It's like, hey, let's do Hamlet. Okay, but let's do it as, you know, a boardroom, and Hamlet is actually an executive of the CEO, or, you know, like, hey, let's do A Midsummer Night's Dream. Sure, but let's do it in Venetian, you know, Italy, and blah, blah, blah. Like they've always got to be the wacky twist, you know. And Go's wacky twist is like, what if we did Lovecraft, but we did it as Lovecraft? Huh? What if
I
we
hope
just
that's how
did
he pitched it
as written in the book, just like it is, like just there, you know? And he took that.
What if I just drew Lovecraft?
Right? What if I just drew Lovecraft? But the thing about it is that the reason why I think people don't necessarily do straight Lovecraft adaptations because it's so hard, right? Because what he did in his words does not translate well to pictures, to the point where I honestly thought it was impossible. Like I would have never thought that someone could do it. And then Tanabe has done it, you know, like just, and you'll see that constantly in almost every review. People will say that, you know, this is not just a great comic, this is the greatest adaptation of Lovecraft in any media, which I think is true. It's far superior to any Lovecraft film I've ever seen, far superior to any other comic I've seen. I mean, the only thing that I would say that comes even close to as good of an adaptation as this is there's some radio plays that do a pretty solid version of Lovecraft because they don't have to do visuals, you know, but Tanabe just managed to just slay it, you know, and he does have a lot more, you know, so I'm hoping that, I'm hoping we get to bring the whole library, you know, and I would love it if like, because Go Tanabe was never really popular in Japan as well, actually, interestingly enough. So it's his, and this is something he's been really happy about, is that his popularity in America, in the West, has actually given him a boost in Japan, because they're like, oh, he got nominated for the Eisner Award. What's this? You know, maybe I need to peek up in this. So it's been a really nice relationship with Dark Horse, you know, sort of bringing him over as a relatively unknown, and managing to boost his profile both here and in his own country. And as well as like the Lovecraft stuff, because as much as I love his Lovecraft stuff, he did an amazing series on traditional Japanese ghost stories that I would absolutely love to bring to the West. Like, so I'm hoping that we can do like Go Tanabe's Lovecraft, yes, and then maybe move that step over to yes, Go Tanabe, that he himself is the star, and it's not just his Lovecraft adaptations, you know. And
Yeah, I want to
would
read
love
that
it,
myself. So
yeah,
let's do that.
Yep. Yeah.
It's so good. It's so good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, at that very same San Diego, actually, where the Eisners happened, I remember specifically talking about, we had The Hound and Volume 1 of Mountains of Madness out at that time. And it was coming near the end of the show, which, as most people know who've been to a convention, the last part of the last day, we're all trying to sell our books so that we don't have to ship them all home.
Yeah.
And, so I remember specifically talking to many people, showing them those books. You know, they were browsing the other manga that we had. Pickings were starting to get a little slim, and these were we had a few volumes left kind of tucked into the corner. And so I started bringing them out and showing them to people. And as soon as you see this incredibly detailed, realistic art, you're visually hooked, I think. And once I explained that these were adaptations of Lovecraft, and we would start talking about it, I mean, those final volumes went immediately. And I'm so happy. I love getting more people into series like that, and kind of discovering artists and writers that maybe that have apparently gone overlooked. Why do you think that is in Japan? Why do you think that his isn't as popular?
It's hard to say. I mean, for one thing, people have to understand that Japan's sheer quantity of manga output, just dwarfs anything that's ever done in the US, right? We see like maybe one volume of translated manga per 1,000 actually published in Japan, right? And when you're dealing with people on that big of they just can't all be winners, I mean, he had a following, and that's what it is. And also I would say that maybe Lovecraft is also just not as much a thing in Japan as it is over in the West. I mean, I think there's people that are familiar with Lovecraft, but not to the extent that it is here, And so, I mean, just a combination of factors. Maybe he just needed someone to shine the spotlight on him, and Dark Horse was the one to do it, And now I should say, now that the spotlight has been shined, I mean, it's shining bright as the blazing sun. His At the Mountains of Madness just recently won the Best Manga Award for the Angoulême International Comics Festival. I mean, it's not like Tanabe has suddenly gone up. I mean, he's literally jumped to like the upper echelons here, but mostly on an international stage, right? So like he's doing great, and a lot of people are really starting to discover him as an artist. And it's one of those things that Dark Horse should be really proud of, to know that they were the first English publisher to really recognize that talent and bring it out.
Well,
and
I'm glad he
recognize that I was
it.
the one. Yeah, he does deserve it. It's phenomenal. And like I said, his stuff is just so good. And from a translation perspective, it's been At the Mountains, like his work is one of the most challenging things I've ever worked on, because it's something I really care about. I know him now personally as well. And so it's just like looking at his work and understanding that I'm not translating Lovecraft, right? I'm translating Go Tanabe's interpretation of Lovecraft. And so what I try to do is look for the stuff that he did that is Lovecraft, and as well as the stuff that is brand new. And so what I'll take it, and I have a Japanese version of the Lovecraft books that he worked from. And so if he uses specific passages that were exact, then I know that he wanted that. And so I'll go to my Lovecraft books and I'll use the actual H.P. Lovecraft's words in there. But if he changed something, then I'll know that he wanted that to be in there differently, that he wasn't as, for whatever reason, he wanted to change Lovecraft's original text. So it's really like this multiple level of deciphering of, what did Go write, what did Lovecraft write, and then how do I render that and match it in English, which is really fun too, because you're like, I get to, write Lovecraftian, when it's Go's doing his portion of it. And it's fun. And it's also been interesting seeing him sort of like gain confidence in his adaptations, because his first adaptations were a little bit more straightforward. And then as he goes along, he's been able to sort of like play with the mix a little bit more, and, put little twists on there so that there's still Lovecraft. I love the fact that, I told you I could talk about this for hours, but I love the fact that he adapted a lot of Lovecraft's not famous stories, right? I mean, we're dealing with stuff like The Hound and The Temple. It's not Call of Cthulhu. It's not Dunwich Horror. It's not Innsmouth. It's like all of this other Shadow over Innsmouth. It's all this other stuff. And he's got all of them, like Music of Eric Zahn, like Cats of Uther. He does adaptations of all of these, I guess what you would consider to be minor stories, but presents them in a way that's just phenomenal. And he does the big ones too. Like he did Shout Out of Time recently, and he did Call of Cthulhu recently too. So
yeah, we're definitely talking about which might be next that we bring over. Obviously, you're the best translator for the job with your vast knowledge and appreciation for Lovecraft. We have a couple questions from chat for you. So do you have a favorite Lovecraft story, first of all?
Yeah, I do. My favorite Lovecraft story is probably The Music of Eric Zahn, which is a really small short story, but it's one of the first ones I read, and I just love like one of the things I love about Lovecraft, if you're familiar with The Music of Eric Zahn, is it's basically written from the point of view of like you're in an apartment and your upstairs neighbor plays the violin, but it's weird and it doesn't sound like normal music. And you eventually, through various antics, go up there and find out that he's playing this, multi-dimensional music that opens, portals into space. And so it's just like, I love this idea that there's always something like outside of normal realm, but it's not so far outside. Like it's literally like, oh my God, Kara, what's that behind you? It's like just like that sort of like sneaky stuff. Like if you just peeled back that curtain, or just open this door right behind me, maybe it would open up into the great cosmos or something like that instead of a hallway. Like I just love that sort of like bizarre sense.
And while we're on the topic, another question from the chat is, did you have anybody else working with you not while translating, but can you talk a bit about the team, I guess, that worked on our adaptation?
Yeah, I mean, there's not really a team per se. There's just me. I mean, my work is literally, I get this in the Japanese version, I flop it open right here on my computer, and I type, and the other person I work with, I shouldn't say there's not really a team. So the other person I work with is, and I'll pass it off to Carl Horn, my editor, and Carl he's just, I don't know, he's a legend in manga translation, like a living legend. That guy is just too much.
We will get him on here one day. It may be a silhouette or a puppet, but it'll be his voice.
So, I work with Carl, and Carl does all, he'll do the editing and he'll get in there, and, he's really, really good at his job. I mean, maybe one of the best there ever is. And so it's lovely to pass stuff off to Carl and just have absolute trust that he's going to refine what I put in there. Because one of the things about when you're doing it is like, one of the keys of manga translation is really like the physical bubble is there on the space, right, on the page. And so I can kind of guess how much text will fit in there, but I don't always know. And so Carl might have to, edit it up. And then also Steve Dutro is the letterer. And there's one person that, like, anytime in manga, letterers are never given nearly as much credit as they should be. I mean, they are just absolute superstars of the manga world. And you never see them get their praise, but they should. He does a great job with the lettering. And I also just want to say that another thing I love about working with Dark Horse is that you guys all, let's see if I can do on the screen, you actually credit everyone. Which should not be as exciting as it is. It shouldn't be as exciting to know that, like, oh, hey, as a company, we give everyone proper credit for their work. Like, it should be the normal, but it's not. It's not the level set, but Dark Horse does it. So
thank you. It's definitely something that we strive for in all respects, over to social media too, doing our best to make sure that everybody gets tagged so that you see it and you can share it, and that people, know that you worked on it. We don't always necessarily get all the information right up front. So Kate in PR, for example, I know there have been a few times where maybe we didn't have a letterer hired yet, and so their name didn't make it into the info we had for a press release or something. But as soon as we have it, that's absolutely something we like to emphasize.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. Like, letterers are just so vital, especially like when they're doing, they're doing the sound effects. They're like, they can get in there and actually have to read all pages sometimes because the artwork and, and the sound effects, how they work in manga, they do so much heavy lifting for a book, and they should always get more credit.
Yeah, that's a great call, and makes me want to do some more dives soon, Kate, into letterers and manga.
Yeah.
We have another question on the Lovecraft topic. Kate and myself, are we also into Lovecraft? I'm gonna let Kate start.
So I actually just read the Gotamabe Mountains of Madness a couple of weeks ago, and it is so good. It is truly, truly the best adaptation of Lovecraft. Obviously, Zack already said that like 1,000 times, but it's amazing. It was a joy to read, and the perfect amount of spook that I wanted. It was perfect all around. I'm not the most familiar with Lovecraft, but I'm definitely diving in. So that was kind of one of the first. I've read a couple other short stories here and there, but I'm gonna keep doing a dive.
Yeah.
I'm looking.
And I feel like, since we're talking about Lovecraft, I always feel like it should be acknowledged, that as much as I love Lovecraft, as much as he was foundational, he was a pretty awful human being. He was racist, he was sexist, he was pretty much every bad word, every bad thing that you can come up with. And I think that, like, you can't really talk about Lovecraft without, like, just sort of universally acknowledging that, like, yeah, his books were great. Yeah, he was hugely influential, and yes, he was awful, just awful. So
yeah,
I just want to acknowledge it there.
Yeah,
I think it's just one of those things that needs to be said.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's that can be kind of difficult to reconcile. I think especially with more, modern current writers, those who are still alive when things like that come to light. But I do.
It's far easier when they're 100 years dead, right? I mean, it's so much easier. Yeah.
I do. I've loved his. I've always been a short story reader, especially. I love horror short story collections. Have been kind of my thing for a long time. I think that's how I first read Lovecraft, Once Upon a Time. It's hard for me to pick a favorite. I have many, but I think probably Color Out of Space is up there.
Oh yeah.
Recent movie adaptations notwithstanding, and I love how Lovecraftian stories and flavors and tidbits have worked their way into our culture so much. I mean, you'll even find bits of Lovecraft in the Fallout games. If anybody else plays Fallout, you'll know that in each one of the games, there's at least one little section where you find yourself, suddenly reality is distorted. And if you know your Lovecraft mythos, then you realize after a while that, oh, I'm actually in the Dunwich Horror right now. And I think that's telling, despite his personal failings, his storytelling has definitely remained strong. We have another adaptation, actually, a Dark Horse, very different, but Neil Gaiman's A Study in Emeralds.
Oh, yeah.
Is another Lovecraft adaptation, which I highly recommend. We'll drop some links in the chat for that. Cool. And I think if we can tear ourselves away from Lovecraft, maybe that's your chance, Kate.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to take a jump, and we're going to go on to something that you can find on Zach's shirt. And we are going to talk about Star Blazers now.
Yamato. So yes, this is like, there's certain comics that are just, the fact that I work on them now, like if I had a time machine and I could go back and I could say, like, the 7-year-old Zack's like, hey, you're going to grow up to work on Star Blazers. He would be like, yes, well done. Yeah. I mean, Star Blazers, obviously, for especially like people of my generation, absolutely foundational series. I mean, Star Blazers actually is not just even for people. It is the foundation of all manga culture everywhere, both in Japan and in the United States. Like, it's not, people don't know it as much, but Star Blazers was actually, Space Battleship Yamato was the first anime series in Japan to gather what we would know as a fandom nowadays, right? It had people lined up in blocks. The very first anime con or manga anime con ever held in the United States was Yamato Con. So it is the source of everything that we enjoy today. And I just absolutely adore it. Like, I translated the original Space Battleship Yamato as well. And then when 2199 came out, I of course had to work on this. And it's such a good series. you know, a lot of times when someone takes something beloved and they do a modernized version of it, it is just universally awful. I mean, there's very, I mean, I hate to say it, but there's very rarely a time where it's like, you know, oh, I'm going to go back and I'm going to do the new cool version of, you know, this thing I loved as a kid. Like, I'm really going to knock out the park with, you know, Rainbow Bright or something like that. I mean, they're just, sometimes they're good. I don't know. But this one they did a really great job with. And a lot of it is because Yamato is held with such esteem in Japan. I try to tell people that Yamato is kind of like Japan's Star Wars, in that it's not just a comic, it's a religion. You know, it's something that people just fall to the ground and worship Space Battleship Yamato. And so when the chance came and they're like, hey, we're going to make a new Yamato, like literally everyone wanted to work on it. Every single animator, every single manga artist in Japan, they're all like, yeah, I'm there. And so they gathered a crew that I thought was just, that was pretty impressive, is that they gathered old people that had worked on the original Yamato, and then they grabbed sort of like the best of the new talent, and they brought them together to build something so that they would have everything that was great, retain everything that was great about the original, but also find some new way to keep the Yamato going forward. And what they did, which I thought was really interesting, is they took the storyline of the Yamato and they're like, okay, these are the key points we have to hit on the story. Like, the Yamato has to go here. It has to blow up the floating island on Jupiter. It has to do this. And then they're like, and then what happens in between then? And that in-between area was where they got to add new story, right? They got to layer stuff on and do some really interesting stuff, and also fix some mistakes, because quite famously in the original Yamato, when the Gamelots first appear, they're pink-skinned. And then halfway through the show, not even halfway through the show, like a few episodes later, they're all blue. And there's never explained why. The real reason is because one of the producers saw a new episode. He's like, I can't tell the difference between the humans and the Gamelons. Make one of them blue. And so they did, because the producer said that. And that's it. That's the whole reason. But they were able to take that and then build in like into this story. And so now you had pink-skinned Gamelons, you had blue-skinned Gamelons, and there was like a racial like sort of, you know, battle going on between them as well, where one of them were lower class citizens versus the purebloods, which were the blue-skinned Gamelons. And so they actually managed to add a lot into this to make it really fantastic. And it's been, yeah, it's been so much fun to work on. I just adore it. It's great. Yeah, read it. So good. Is
this anime, like, is that available anywhere right now that you know of? I was just
gonna ask, yeah.
What, the anime series?
Yeah.
I believe it is on Amazon. No, actually, I don't believe. I know it's on Amazon Prime.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you have it.
Yeah, it's on Amazon. It's great. The comic is fantastic. The comic artist, Michiko Murakawa, did just a phenomenal job. I think it's like one of the also phenomenal jobs that, like, the original artist, Matsumoto Leiji, he has such a distinct style, and they managed to keep the sort of flavor of Matsumoto's style while still once again adding everything new. And I think that is the best thing about Yamato, is like they didn't throw away anything that worked. You know, everything that was good and solid they kept. Also, Matsumoto Leiji is very famous for never finishing his stories. His stories, he sometimes just kind of gets bored and lets them drift away. And so the joke is that the Yamato is on an endless voyage, which means that it just eventually sails off into the end. And, you know, so you get maybe a little bit more closure with the current series, but not completely, because it's still a Matsumoto series. So.
Yeah, we know a few other writers who are similar.
Yep.
Well, you sang the theme song, which I would have asked you to do anyway.
Oh yeah,
so...
that's, in fact, if you ever come to a convention, one of my favorite things on earth is to get my editor Carl Horn and I up there, and we do the Carl and Zack show, and we sing the Yamato theme song. So yes.
Yes, if you ever have the chance to go to one of those manga panels, they're the highlight of my show every time. They're fantastic. There are songs. It's great. It's great.
Oh yeah.
One day, like I said, we will have Carl Horn on one of these streams. Maybe we will bring that panel live.
Yes.
To Twitch on the internet, since we're all home now and cons are kind of going virtual.
You don't need to come to us now. We come to you.
Exactly. The internet needs to help support me in this, because Carl is very reluctant to be on camera.
Yes.
As I said, I told him he's either going to be an FBI most wanted silhouette or a puppet, basically. with his.
What if we just bring Carl on and everyone promises not to watch?
Oh, there you go.
I mean, we could tell him
like,
that.
Yeah, right? Yeah, everyone just cover his eyes, you know, because Carl is too beautiful to behold. So we'll have to look away. I think we can do it.
Yeah.
Carl is a treat. So one day we will make that happen for everyone. Yes. And he's also the one with the encyclopedic knowledge of
my God,
Dark Horse manga and you know, hip hop and other random things. Yeah, there's never a dull moment with Carl.
Yes, true. He knows it all.
So who's your favorite Star Blazers character?
Oh gosh, you know, that's a tough question. Yeah. I really love Yuki, the main girl, because she is my first crush on a cartoon character and has stayed that way ever since then. So yes, Nova in the English version. Although I did sort of insist on keeping their Japanese names, even though in the English version originally they were all given happy English sounding names like Derek Wildstar and things like that. But we kept the term Star Blazers, but everything else we've maintained the Japanese localization, which I think has been nice. You know, I mean, like, it's the stuff I grew up on, but those were different times. And I think in the modern world we can have a main hero called Susumu. We don't have to give him, you know, a new name in order to enjoy them as the main hero. So I think that's been kind of nice. But yeah, definitely Yuki. She's my favorite. She's awesome. Susumu Kodai, everyone's got to love him, right? The hotshot pilot. He's cool, you know. Oh yeah, you know who else I love? God, I should, you know, I've got a toy right here on my desk, but I really love the robot Analyzer. Analyzer is one of those things where I laugh because as a manga translator, I decided to give Analyzer a very specific voice speaking style in the first volume, thinking that would be really clever, and then realizing that, oh my God, I'm going to have to keep that going for the remainder of the entire series. So I kind of dug myself a hole there, but I think it's worth it because when Analyzer comes on, you know, he talks in a very specific speech pattern that when you read the comic, you'll be able to see Analyzer's speech pattern. Oh yeah, that's the other thing. When I translate manga, I totally do the voices out loud. I don't know any other way to do it. I don't know any other way to write dialogue except for to actually speak them out loud, because otherwise I don't think that the dialogue sounds natural, you know? So like I'll do stuff and I'll be here and I'll be like, you know, when I'm doing, you know, your dialogue, you know, you're like, does this really sound like a human being speaking, you know? And the only way to do that is to speak it, you know. Cowards, it seems their ships are tough, but they aren't. Damage astern, sir, but helm's normal. Good. Open torpedo bay 1. Distance enemy cruiser, 8,600. Speed of +2. Lock on! Fire! I mean, I do that all the time. And I'm so glad that there's no one at my house when I translate except for me and my cat. Now that my wife's been home, it's been kind of funny because normally she would go to work, but she is a chef, and so she doesn't have her job. And she's like, I've never heard you before. You sound like a crazy person. And I'm like, yeah, I kind of do. But
maybe you can have her come in and like read some of the parts when you need
some voices for me.
Yeah. And then let me know when you're going to do that, and we'll hide a camera somewhere. Let's see what else we have from the chat. Are there? I don't want to derail us from Star Blazers, but this is a good, interesting question. Zach, what other manga creators would you like to introduce to English-speaking audiences? If anybody.
That's a great question. Like, there's one. Saga Miyuki, who's one of my favorite manga creators. She did horror in the 60s, and so she did this basically girls horror back in the 1960s, and she did like just great stuff, but it is very dated, so it's a hard sell in the modern world, sadly. I don't know, some of the stuff like I really like, there's a lot of stuff I really like, and I kind of wish there was more of a market for it, but I have to understand that there's really not, you know. I tried that before with Dark Horse. I'm like, why don't we bring out something called like shoujo horror theater or something, and you just give me one book, and I just do like 10 Saga Miyuki stories, and we'll just see. And like, I remember Carl Horn, my editor, looking at me very seriously and saying, Zach, if we did that, we would sell exactly 2 copies, and one of them would be to you. But I still always have hope that someday Saga Miyuki's time will come, and there will be an audience for 1960s girls horror. So,
All right, I'm gonna look it up. I'm gonna go check this out, and we'll see.
Maybe one of these days. But yeah, I mean, and then there's other, there's some random stuff that I like. I've got what I call my hope shelf. I have this little hope shelf of stuff that I would like to translate, and every now and then I'll like send stuff over. I'm like, what about this? What about this? But yeah, I mean, there's definitely artists I like, but I like even meeting, finding new artists. Like, I had never heard of Gotanabe before until I got the email from Dark Horse saying, would you like to work on this? And most of my really big dream artists, I have done it. I've worked on them. I translated Matsumoto Leiji. I've translated, Go Nagai and Mizuki Shigeru, and, just sort of like, all of these big guys. So yeah, but there's definitely, like, if anyone wants to see my list of hope chests, I've got it. I send it over every now and then, even just like to Dark Horse. I'm like, I mean, but Joji Manabe, who did Outlanders, is another one. I would love to work on some of his stuff. I mean, he was so influential to me that to be able to bring his stuff back to English, because it's disappeared from English for decades, so that would be really something exciting.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions in the chat?
We do. How about I'll give one, and then let's go back to your next topic, Kate. Perfect. But I like this one. What is your favorite sound effect? If you had to kind of make one up or translate it, and if so, how did you come up with it? So
that's a really interesting question, because without a doubt, the most difficult thing to translate in manga is sound effects, easily. Like, dialogue is so much easier to do, but when you get to, like, I'm just trying to think of some good examples. Like the classic example, and a lot of people that translate manga do this. Like, I know a couple different manga companies where they'll give you a translation test, and one of the things that they always put on the translation text is the sound effects shing, which in Japanese is the sound of silence. There is nothing equivalent in English, right? Sheen is literally the sound of nothing. And it's like, it's used in Japanese vocally, which is weird that they actually have a vocal sound for silence. So like, say you tell a joke that no one laughs at, right? You tell this really awful joke, like, and there's just dead silence. In Japanese, one of your friends might look at you and go, shing, to let you know that you were not at all funny, But it's literally impossible to translate into English. And so there's a test of like, what do you do with that? What do you do with a sound effect that does not exist? And not only doesn't conceptually exist, because that's the other thing about language. Language is more than words. Language is a transmitter of concepts, right? And so we don't have the concept of a sound of silence. We have a song all about it, but we don't actually have a concept. And so what do you do with that? Like, what do you do with sheen? I tend to just go, just SSSSS, I once tried to be clever and do ... and it looked really bad when it was on the page. It was just like, it looks awful. But other stuff, like I tried to give really like, I was just going to say here, so do I have to look it up? One of the funnest things to do in manga also is coming up with sound effects. Like I come up with very specific sound effects for things like the wave motion gun, right? So in Star Blazers, the wave motion gun gets its own sound that nothing else gets. And I'm trying to look it up here. And I believe it is, because I wanted to give it like a, like a sort of SF blasty sound, right? That's different from a bullet. So, like the wave motion gun gets its own sound. And like another one, like I actually did this for Dark Horse, which is Satoshi Kon's Opus. And then this one here, there's this basically shifting of worlds, and the reader knows when a world has shifted because there's a sound effect that happens in the background, and there's nothing else. There's just a sound effect. And so I had to keep it consistent. And so, I gave it like the sound effect was like, grrr, I don't know. I mean, it looks good. You know, maybe it doesn't sound that great out loud, but it looks good on the page. And I think that's vital when you're doing books. Like the sound effects matter so much.
And they can be very fun.
They can be very fun, but they also have to be consistent. Like if you're doing a war comic, a machine gun should sound different from a pistol. You know, a pistol should sound different from, you know, an offshore shell that comes flying in. Like there's just so many different noises that have to be done to be consistent. Oh yeah, there it is. Yes, wave motion gun firing. Yeah.
I like actually hearing it like with your voice though, because in my head it's gonna sound, you know, however my brain processes it, but I like to hear yours.
Well, and that's the joy of comics, right? Because, you know, in your head, everything is your own thing. Like you're gonna take something I made, like, you know, somebody like an artist made, you know, Murakawa made this, and who knows what was in his head. And then I translate it, and I have something in my head, and I pass it over to you. And so we each get to have our own experience with it, which is kind of a fun thing. Mm-hmm. You know, and people, what's that?
Oh, do people come up to you at conventions and like, have you had conversations where you're kind of surprised at how they pronounce or say things?
Oh yeah, but I try to be flexible with that, you know, because it's not really important. You know, if someone pronounces a name like, oh, did I pronounce it wrong? I'm like, it doesn't really matter. You know, it doesn't, you know.
Yeah. I guess I'm thinking more of like, the sound effects and just how things sound. I mean, I know that with prose books too, often I'll be talking to someone about a book and we'll discover that we pronounce the characters' names completely differently or places. There's just so much room for variation, but I don't, you know, as you said, it's not something to get upset about. I think it's just different in different people's heads.
Well, and sound effects also, I mean, they're such an interesting thing because they're handled so differently by different companies and things like that as well, especially in manga sound effects. And also, it's a place where because I've been a lifelong comics reader. I've been reading comics for my entire life, and I have this entire head catalog of famous sound effects. And so every now and then I will sort of sneak them in as like my own little nod to, you know, like because if you have a character, like say I'm translating, you know, Devilman, and he pops out a claw, why not have it say snicked, which is like, you know, the Wolverine sound effect. Or I've had a few times where there was some ropey stuff and the ropey stuff went flip, 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 which everyone who knows is Spider-Man sound effect. And one of my favorite things to do is that I absolutely adore the comic book Empowered by Adam Warren, also published in Dark Horse. And her magic power sound is Warp. And so I sneak a few of those into manga every now and then.
So there's Easter eggs.
There are a few Easter eggs.
Everybody should check out these manga and other comics and look for those Easter eggs.
Yeah, only comic book sound effects aficionados would recognize. But
so this is perfect because my next line of questioning is just kind of general translation questions for you.
Sure, yeah.
So first, what's the most common question you get as a translator?
The most common question I get as a translator is also equally the dumbest question. And it almost always follows one after the other to the point to where I just don't understand what goes on in people's brains when I say, oh yeah, so I'm a manga translator, which is almost immediately followed by, oh, so do you know Japanese then? And I'm always confused by that because I'm like, well, I wouldn't be able to do my job very well if I couldn't read Japanese or speak Japanese. So yeah, I mean, manga translation is interesting because it's, you know, it's something that it's a very, I don't want to say hidden world, but it's not an obvious one. I mean, not many people know stuff about it, or a lot of people think they know a lot about it and they are entirely wrong. So I think, you know, it's not something that people understand the process. Like a lot of people have so many different ideas about what I do. Like some people think that I essentially do a rough translation and then I pass it off to an editor and the editor does all of the actual work, which is not true. You know, so, I mean, yeah, that's definitely the biggest question I get is, do you speak Japanese? But it's not the smartest question, you know, not for sure. But I mean, I think people it depends on what your level of interest is too, you know, like in manga itself. A lot of people will ask me stuff about manga that I just don't know because I don't work on those books. You know, I'm pretty focused on the work that I do. Yeah. You need someone like Carl that has the headcanon of all manga ever made.
Yes, we all need a Carl for all of our manga questions. How did you become a manga translator?
So I became a manga translator. I really never intended to become a manga translator per se, but I was it was in Japan, and I fell in love with the works of a manga artist who, not published by Dark Horse, sorry, but there was a manga artist named Mizuki Shigeru. And Mizuki Shigeru, when I was living in Japan, he's so foundational to the country. Like it's impossible to describe how famous he is in Japan. I tell people always, like, imagine if there was someone more famous than Walt Disney, right? And more fundamental to the culture, to where literally if he had not been there, Japan would now be a different country, completely. Like, he is just foundational, and we knew nothing about him. Like, he was just completely unknown in the West. And it was such a weird impact to get there, to move to Japan and realize that everything I thought about Japan, a lot of it turned out to be not true. And what was really important to Japan were people like Mizuki Shigeru. And I just thought it was such a odd gap. And so I once, very honestly, and I tell this with absolute sincerity, and Kara will not be surprised about this at all, more than anyone else here. I had a friend who owned a bar in Japan, and I got very drunk, and I climbed up on one of the tables at the bar, and I shouted out, "I shall be the one to bring Mizuki Shigeru to the West." And I decided to make it my holy mission. And when I came back to the US, I did a lot, I knocked on a lot of doors, and I was like, you guys got to do this. And everyone's like, no, too weird, too old, not sellable. Because the West really, like, when it came to manga, and this mentions a lot about what is manga. It's like probably around the 90s, Western culture really imprinted on Dragon Ball and Sailor Moon, right? They were like, and we as a culture decided, this is manga. What is manga? Manga is this, Dragon Ball, and manga is this, Sailor Moon. And anything that departed away from those two archetypes was not acceptable. It didn't sell books. People didn't want it, and stuff that was kind of closer to that sold like hotcakes. And so smart companies learned that you needed, in order to sell books, because we're all here to sell books. Like, we're not here to just put ourselves out of business, publishing stuff that won't sell, and so that became sort of the channel. You were going down the Dragon Ball channel, or you were going down the Sailor Moon channel. And those were the only channels you could really sail in manga for a long time, and then you bring over something like Mizuki Shigeru, and he is in neither of those channels, right? Not only is he in neither of those channels, he is in his own channel, 500 feet away, but his channel is an ocean, and it's just too big. And I heard that from people too. They're like, the problem with Mizuki Shigeru is we don't know what shelf to put him on. He doesn't go on the manga shelf, but he doesn't, because he does kids comics. He does World War II memoirs. He does a biography of Hitler, for God's sake. Where are we supposed to put this guy at the comic shop? And so it was just really hard. But finally, I found, I got a hold of Drawn and Quarterly, who pitched him as, instead of a manga artist, pitched him as a world cartoonist. And so that was part of their series. And finally, he found a place that he fit. You couldn't sell Mizuki Shigeru with Naruto, but you could sell him with Mobius. You could sell him with people like that, with Moomin, or things like these, like great cartoonists of the world. That's finally where he fit and where he had a home. And so that was my first foray into manga translation. And once I'd done that, I was like, it was awesome. And I'm like, well, I want to do more, and I love Dark Horse. I've always loved Dark Horse. So I was talking to Carl Horn once, and I was just like, well, I'd love to work with Dark Horse. Dark Horse is one of my favorite companies of all time. And Carl's like, we may have something for you. And I'm like, that would be great. Who do you have? And much to my shock, Carl's like, oh, we just got the license for Satoshi Kon. And I'm like, you're kidding me. Like, really? You got the license for Satoshi Kon? He's like one of my favorite of all time. He's like, yes, would you like to do his work? I'm like, yes, I would very, very. And that's kind of been my life ever since then. Like, I tend to translate as a manga translator. I think I'm a little different from a lot of translators is I tend to translate very specific artists. Like there's artists I love and I'm passionate about their work and I want to bring their work to English. And so those are the people that I tend to work on rather than, I don't just like get assigned whatever I'm assigned or something like that. Although, however, I do have to say that one of my favorite things to work on, because every now and then I'll get thrown a loop of stuff that I would never have normally worked on. And it was, you know, you'll notice there's always something a little odd sitting on my shelf. Panty and Stockings with Garterbelt is one of them, which I adore. Carl Horn sent this over to me because I had just translated the comic I had talked about earlier, the biography of Hitler, and Carl thought it would be funny to say Panty and Stockings with Garterbelt from the translator of Hitler. And so that's how I got this job, like this, you know, and it was super fun. Actually, it was a blast. You know, it was such a different change and so challenging because it was humorous, and humor is so much more difficult to translate than horror. Any day of the week, it is so hard because jokes, I mean, humor and jokes are almost entirely linguistically and culturally based, right? Jokes are either a play on words or there's some sort of cultural reference or something, or a pop culture reference, right? There's very few jokes that are inherently funny when removed from that culture. And so translating humor is so difficult. It's fun. It's an interesting challenge, but it's very hard.
We do still, people remember Panty and Stocking with Garterbelt.
Oh, yeah.
And it comes up perennially. It is still available both in print and in digital. We don't always have digital rights for all our manga. Manga in particular tends to be a pretty specific license. Dark Horse will get the license to publish very specifically like these print editions in English in these specific territories, usually North America only. So it gets pretty nitpicky, and we don't always have digital rights, but that's one that we do. So that's
and
nice.
that's, you know, that's another thing that you actually like, what do people ask you about manga? That's one of the things where people don't understand, because there's so much background stuff, like all the licensing stuff that goes in and how specific it is. Like, you know, because they'll have different, you know, manga artists will, it's like, try to describe it, it's like licensing Star Wars, right? You know, George Lucas or not George Lucas anymore, Disney came up and said like, oh, you want Star Wars? Like, yes, like you can have the special edition. Like, and not only that, you can have the 2011 special edition. Like, we'd like the original. You can have the 2011 special edition. That's it. And any deviation you make from that. And so people are like, well, why did you license this version instead of this one? You know, why did you license this instead of this? And most of the time it's because that's what we got. And I like that. Like one of the comics I did for 7 Seas, Devilman, I thought was pretty interesting because, you know, Go Nagai licensed only the version that he felt the most comfortable with. And I thought that was honestly great. Like, it's nice that creators have the ability and the control over their own work to determine what happens to it. They should be able to do that. It should be their choice, and they should have a say in that. Any more than if Mike Mignola was, you know, licensing out Hellboy to somewhere in Japan, and they're like, well, we want to do this, but we want to do this and this and this to it. You know, I'm sure he'd be like, no. I mean, so I like that. It can be sometimes, the licensing thing can be sometimes a pain, but at the same time, you know that it's artists who have control over their own work, and that should never be a bad thing. You know, it really shouldn't.
Yeah,
that should always be something that we see as a positive, even when it's kind of frustrating.
Absolutely. A very key point is that's really what it comes down to, is it's the artist's rights, the owner's rights, and they decide what they do with the books. And so that can even, that has a lot to do with, you know, people ask, why do we have an omnibus edition, or why has this, you know, series stopped, maybe been paused, maybe it's gone out of print. We have to work with the artist, with the owner of that license, to, you know, cooperate and do something that all parties can agree on. And that can take time. And sometimes they don't want to do what we would be able to do here in America. So it has a pretty far reaching effects on our publishing of certain series.
It does. And digital. And digital is another one of those, because, you know, manga has historically had a bad problem with piracy. And so a lot of people don't want to license a digital version, you know. And a lot of others, like, will famously feel, I know that Mizuki Shigeru did this as well, is he felt like the comic was the correct version. And so he didn't want to license a digital version because you were then no longer reading it as intended. You know, he wanted you to read the comic. This page on the left and this page on the right should be visible at the same time. And he cared about his art more than like the money was nothing to them. What did he need? He was 93 years old. He was the most famous man in Japan. You know, I mean, he couldn't have cared less for money, but he cared that his art was presented the way he wanted it presented. And that meant no digital. So to this day, there's no digital because it was his wishes. And, you know, we can go like bummer, but at the same time, awesome, because he got to have control over his own artwork. And that's like, once again, something we should all applaud.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like you said, I mean, Mignola's a perfect example. We want the same for our creators here. We can expect the same from our Japanese creators as well.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I have 2 final questions for you on
Sure.
my own, and then we've probably got a couple more chat questions. But for the aspiring translators out there, what's your number 1 piece of advice?
Oh gosh, it's the worst advice in the world because it's not easy. My number 1 advice always move to Japan. Just move for about 7-8 years.
Nice.
There's very few professional translators. They do exist. There's very few professional translators that have not lived in Japan for some period of time. You can study, like I know for myself, you can study from a book and you can get up to a certain level, but without immersion, you'll lose a lot of context. You'll lose just a lot of understanding how people speak. You know, it's like the difference between someone telling you like, hey, you know what, you rock, and then translate that into someone saying you are an actual stone versus understanding, you know, there's just so much nuance there. And there are, once again, with the caveat, there are absolutely people who have not lived in Japan that are professional translators. You know, I was doing a panel once with, God, I can't remember his name, Peter of J Novel Club, and he put it, he's like, there are savants. There are savants. However, you are probably not a savant. Unfortunately, like the rest of us, you are going to have to take the long and hard road there. So unless you can count on being a savant, my number 1 advice, and it's not actually that hard to move to Japan. Like I did it via the JET program, which is this program, which is basically the Japanese government hires people to go to Japan for a year and work in their English teaching system. You know, there's quite a few opportunities there. And I think that a lot of people will tell themselves no. They're like, oh, I don't have the money. I don't have blah, blah, blah. I don't have blah, blah, blah. There are many roads, and it just takes willpower and your own, you know, no one's going to open those roads for you. You go find them because they do exist. Other than that, my other advice, like specifically for a manga translator, is practice. Like the way I learned how to translate manga was I took a series that was already written, that was already translated in English, a series called Dr. Slump. And I took volume 1 of the Japanese and I translated the whole thing. And then I went and I compared it page by page, word by word to the printed version. And my version was terrible by comparison. And I did that for the entire series. I translated like something like 10 volumes. And I figured the closer I matched the published English version, the more I was understanding what the art of translation was. And that was my classroom. So I say that with the caveat that if you want to practice, and you absolutely should, don't post your homework on the internet. Because if you want to do something professionally, scanlation is seriously not a good thing. It's the artists, you know, Japanese artists hate it. It breaks their heart. Please don't do it. So practice all day long, but don't post it on. And you're much better translating something, like I said, that is already translated, because it gives you something to compare yourself against, right? How did I do? What's my feedback? It's right there. It's instant feedback. You know, and then you learn. It's like, oh, like I think that when you first start translating too, you see how professional translators will change stuff. And when you're first like, oh, this is wrong. They did this wrong. And then by like volume, 8, you're like, oh my God, they're brilliant. How did they manage to come up with this interesting, way of presenting this information in a way that engages English readers? So
yeah. Nice.
That's it. Move to Japan. Bye, everyone. Have a nice time. Probably not now.
Yeah, maybe later, but
Yeah.
do it. That's kind of a perfect lead into my last question, which is, you obviously work from home a lot.
Mhm.
What advice do you have for those of us who are now working from home for the first time?
Oh gosh, I've worked from home for so long now. Build yourself an awesome work from home space if you have the time for it, or like the area for it. Like, make yourself a little place that is go to work. That's exactly what I do. I mean, like my office is my favorite place in the house, and I just come out and hang out here. And it's just nice to have a place where you're actually going to work. Like, this is my workspace. Here is where I work. And I think other than that, everyone has to sort of figure out their own thing. Like, I work and then I put everything down and I get up and I walk around because I just get antsy. I just have to. I get up and move a little bit and I come back. And don't worry too much about what everyone else does, and so much as find out what works with you. Whatever works with you is what works best. I also have this horrible thing, and I think a lot of creative talent that I know, that I talk to other people do too. They're like, oh, I'm having to work. Oh, it's so hard. I can't think of anything. My brain is mush. Then like at 10 o'clock at night, I'm like a switch is lit. I'm like, I am on fire. Everything is the best until like 4 a.m. And it's just like, if it works, it works.
Yeah, that's me too. I'm definitely a night owl.
Yeah.
Actually, Zack, I wanted to ask you, there's an example, a little story that you've told a few times now, but I wonder if you might tell it again, because I think it exemplifies the nuance that a translator brings to your work. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about Spark Joy?
Oh, yeah. I love that story. If you really want to. So Spark Joy is something that almost everyone knows right nowadays, right? People are familiar with Marie Kondo and Spark Joy. One thing that, well, she probably has now, but I was going to say that one thing that Marie Kondo probably had never said in her life was Spark Joy. That is entirely the invention of a translator named Kathy Hirano, who was charged with translating Marie Kondo's book. And Marie Kondo also, it's worth noting, she was almost entirely not unknown, but she certainly was not famous in Japan. There were many books at the time. It was kind of a boom, the tidying up boom, of which there were many, of which Marie Kondo was not the most famous. She actually was kind of a lower level, she had her own cooking show, but she wasn't a Gordon Ramsay, right? She wasn't, an Anthony Bourdain or something like that. She was one of those other people that came on afterwards that you kind of like, do I really want to watch? Maybe, because it's right. And that's one of the reasons why I believe her book was easier to license, because she wasn't one of the hot shots, And Kathy Hirano was given the job of translating, and Marie Kondo's catchphrase in Japanese is tokimeku, tokimeki. And tokimeki is basically a feeling of, does your heart flutter? Like, does your heart go pitter-pat? The direct translation would be throb. Does this make you throb, right? And so when Kathy Hirano, she's written this in interviews before, it was one of many books that she was working on. She didn't think that it would be particularly popular, but she had to come up with a good translation for Tokimeku. And she came up with probably the most brilliant translation of modern times, which is Spark Joy, which I love, not only because it checks so many boxes, right? First off, it sounds similar in cadence to Tokimeku, Spark Joy. They both have that hard K sound in there, which I find fascinating. It also doesn't sound like English. It sounds a little bit like bad Japanese, like bad, English, as they call it, of a Japanese person speaking English, because it's Spark Joy. It's not a normal phrase. It doesn't use words that we are, but it's also just entirely like you hear it and you know exactly what it means, right? And I was trying to figure out, like, I don't know how much Kathy gets paid, but I was trying to figure out, like, based on standard character rates, I would bet she got paid 50 cents to come up with Spark Joy. And as translators, of course, we have no copyright and we have no rights to anything except for whatever check we were cashed as work for hire to make that book. But Spark Joy obviously and completely launched the Marie Kondo empire to the point that where now her books are called Spark Joy, even in languages that are not English. So like the German version is literally the English word spark joy. And now you could actually, like, it's even moved back to the Japanese where her English books, are, her books will now be like Marie Kondo, spark joy, and it's amazing because it was all the power of a translator, right? Marie Kondo did not say that or anything like that. Absolutely nothing. Spark joy is 100% the invention of Kathy Hirano. Yeah.
So as a translator, you can directly influence a lot.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Is my takeaway.
It's a huge, and it's also one of those things where like, when it comes into famous lines, I talk about that also, like, I don't know if anyone's watched My Hero Academia, right? So My Hero Academia, the main hero, All Might, has, his famous catchphrase of, it's okay, I'm here. All Might never says that. That was Caleb Cook who came up with that catchphrase. He invented it. The translator invents these catchphrases, and then they enter in the English language, and then they become so associated that if another translator were to then take over and give a different catchphrase, someone would be like, well, that's not right. That's incorrect. It's like, no, it's not incorrect. It's just, because Horikoshi, who did My Hero Academia, he obviously never wrote that catchphrase. A more accurate would have, a more, not accurate, but a more literal translation for All Mights would be, don't worry, I'm coming, which obviously has different associations in English and would probably make people laugh instead of, it was one of those things that was obviously not going to work. That's actually something that there was the celebration of great moments in localization was yesterday. I think I posted about this. It is that the game Pac-Man, if you're familiar with that. And if you're from the 80s, everyone's familiar with it. I don't know how long it's lasted in the modern era, but the direct translation from Japanese is Puck-Man. And the instant that someone in America saw the cabinet that Bandai had put together, I think it was Bandai, that put together with their new video game and saw Puck-Man written on the side, they're like, nope, 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 nope. Nope, American kids are going to change that P into an F within like 2 seconds. There is no way that we can sell a game called Puck-Man. They will get up there with a little marker. They will draw a single line in that P, and we are going to get in trouble with mothers all over the world, and it will destroy our business. And so, someone else, some unnamed person, probably in a boardroom, was like, well, how about Pac-Man? And someone's like, yeah, that'll work.
Just different enough.
Just different enough.
Rex has come
that's
back.
actually, along with that, like with Star Blazers, right? Space Battleship Yamato. The reason why it's Star Blazers is because when it first came out in the United States, Star Wars was a massive hit. And so they thought that maybe if they threw the word star in there, that people might mistake this for somehow being involved with Star Wars and watch it on accident. Like, oh, Star Blazers, that must have something to do with Star Wars, right? Sure, why not?
Is Battleship the most literal translation as well, or?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it is the literal translation because and that actually was changed for a while because they did a version called Space Cruiser Yamato because people didn't want the association with Battleship because the Yamato is actually a World War II battleship. And there's a lot of, obviously, Japan in World War II was not very nice. And so we didn't necessarily want that association. So, and people have come up with different stuff like that. So, yeah, it's fascinating.
Star Blazers.
Yeah.
It has a nice ring to it.
It does.
Rex, you're too late for What's Michael. We already talked about that.
I was going to showcase some of my other Dark Horse stuff since I've got it here on a big file.
Yeah.
Aside from manga, I've done various game encyclopedias.
Nice. I'm gonna have to put you down, Rex, so I can.
This one here. Oh my God, this thing weighs 1,000,000 tons. Speaking of people coming up with translations that you just use, when I was doing the Metal Gear Solid, because obviously, people have gone through and made these translation decisions long before I ever came on board. So I would go on and I would see what they would do and be like, I think they were just so funny. They're like, wow, you just went with sneak suit, huh? Like, didn't come up with anything clever. We're just going to call it sneak suit. I'm like, okay, man, if that's what everyone's happy with, we'll just go with sneak suit.
I like to imagine how that meeting went. Like, they're all like so burned out trying to come up with clever names for everything. They're just like, ugh.
Eventually they just give up. Yeah. Come on, just throw something out there. No one will remember it. They certainly won't make a giant, like 5-volume hardcover, commemorative edition 20 years from now. Just go with sneak suit. It's fine. It's sneaky. It's a suit that you put on to be sneaky.
I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah.
That Metal Gear Solid collection weighs like what?
Oh my
15
God,
pounds.
Oh,
yeah,
so much.
And let's see what I can do. This is my sneak preview of my new work that I'm doing for Dark Horse. So I've decided, look, everyone, go ahead.
Oh, there it
is. Huh?
Never before seen.
Never before seen.
Wow.
Huh? Look at that.
Wow.
What could it be? There it is. That was your sneak peek. So sneaky.
You'll know one day, we promise.
Right.
Yeah,
hopefully.
we are starting to get back on track with scheduling as printers and retailers and distributors.
Nice.
Starting to come back online. So we'll be able to start talking about upcoming releases again soon.
Yeah, that'll be exciting because we got cool stuff coming down and people will love it.
We do.
We
really
exciting.
do. And a lot of things were announced right before the pandemic kind of took hold, and those things are paused for now. They're not canceled. They're paused. And so they will be back, but it's, it's going to take a lot of adjusting all across the board to make sure everything gets slotted back into a schedule that works and makes sense. And we can get those books in people's hands, whether they're floppies at comic shops, single issues, or books, which are more widely available too.
The comics will roll again.
They will. And also, to celebrate, we drew a winner in our giveaway.
Oh, nice. Did someone spell Berserk properly with an S?
They did. They sure did.
Excellent.
You win. Actually, you don't win the Hound because that is mine. But these are some of the books you will win. Also, Mob Psycho and Danganronpa. That has gone to Korosami 98.
Nice.
So, congrats. And I think they've joined us for a lot of our streams. So thank you for being a loyal viewer. We may have some more Korra news for you soon, so stay tuned. But yeah, so you won the Dark Horse Manga prize pack giveaway, and just send us a whisper here on Twitch and we'll get in touch with you about shipping your prize. Rex is back again to bless this giveaway, apparently. Nice. Let me double check if there are any new questions from chat. Otherwise, I think we're going to wrap this up. We actually did already. So Zach, somebody who's maybe a little newer to this series is asking about the manga creators that you would personally highlight if you could. Maybe you can drop those names in your social media after this and kind of let people know a little list of the creators you mentioned.
Yeah. I mean, anyone, like, especially like right now, check out Gotanabe, man. That stuff is just like, it is so good. It is just magnificent. I keep telling that to everyone. Whatever you like, whatever your interests are, just pick up a volume.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And have your mind blown. So yeah.
And I'll drop the link to your Twitter in the chat as well. But do you want to give people a rundown on where they can find you online, website, social media?
Yeah, I mean, I'm most active on Twitter, so I'm just Zack Davisson on Twitter. I have a website, zackdavisson.com, which also has a contact email if you want to get a hold of me. I'm certainly happy for people to do that. It has a list of all my stuff and, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. But really, I mean, Twitter is just the easiest to find me. I'm on Twitter way more than I should be, but
It happens, especially now while we're all staying home all the time.
Right? Exactly.
And just a reminder, everything we talked about today is available now at comic shops and bookstores. We have special digital deals right now at Dark Horse Digital, also mirrored on Comixology and other services, all books are 50% off. So that is all of our manga that we have digital rights to, as well as all of our other comics. Like some of the things that Zack mentioned, Empowered by Adam Warren is one that is 100%. Actually, the first issue is free right now so that you can try it out. Good. And then maybe get the rest of it for 50% off.
And also,
so we've been dropping those links.
For manga recommendation, I'm going to say I Am a Hero from Dark Horse. It's one of my absolute favorite series. Like, check that out. Is Lone Wolf and Cub digital?
I don't believe we have digital rights now. I was just looking at that. Maybe that's something we can work out in the future. Yeah. And yeah, hopefully.
I know it's available digitally because I bought some on Comixology. So it must be.
I think we had some. I think what I was looking up might have been the new Lone Wolf and Cub because somebody was asking about it. Okay. But we can double check on that.
Yeah. Because I recently read through all of Lone Wolf and Cub from volume 1 all the way to the end. And it is not just a great comic. I honestly consider it to be one of the best works of art ever done in the comic book medium. Like, bar country, nothing involved. It is just phenomenal. It is so good. And it's intimidating to get into because, like, when you put all the physical books, it's like a mountain that stands like, 3 stories tall and you're afraid that it'll fall on you and kill you. And it will. But digitally, it's nice and compact. So,
before you die, you'll enjoy.
You will.
Lone Wolf and Cub.
Lone Wolf and Cub. I Am a Hero is magnificent. Danganronpa is a lot of fun. I had more fun with that than I thought I was going to. It was super fun.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that we publish these Danganronpa I can't talk anymore. Manga. But yeah, we have several different series now, and this is just the latest in those. It's from a different character's perspective. This is Danganronpa 2. Goodbye, Despair.
So dark.
That one actually, I love light novels because their titles are like 400 words long usually. Yep. Yeah. So that one's a short. All right. Well, I'm going to bring us to our conclusion. Thank you again, Zack, for joining us today. Yep. And hopefully we'll have you again soon and we can get Carl in on it.
Yeah, happy to. Anytime. There we go. Yeah. All right.
And thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody at home, for tuning in. And we'll see you again soon. Come back next Wednesday for another new to you Comic Book Day Rundown.
All right.
Have a good night.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.